Maliek Blade.
This week's guest is
founder of 13th and June and celebrity ghostwriter Miss Audrey Ori. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for having me. How are you?
I'm doing great. I'm glad to have you as well.
Thank
So,
you.
I want to begin with unveiling all that you do. I think you've accomplished a lot and done a lot. And I think it's important to highlight these things specifically in the African American community because sometimes I think our stories may not get highlighted or they may get overlooked.
Mhm.
So if you could, and actually before I get to that, I want to tell you that one of my closest friends sent me a write up about you. And
Oh,
that's how
wow.
I got introduced. It was like an Instagram post and it was explaining what you're doing because he knows that I'm working on a book as well. And he sent that to me. I thought this is great. This is the type of stuff that I'm looking for. So he
Wow.
knows my wheelhouse, and I thought, wow, this is a story that I really want to highlight. So that's where it started. But for those that don't know what story I'm talking about, if you could explain to us who you are, what led you to founding 13th and Joan, and what it does exactly, and then later we can talk more about celebrity ghostwriting, but specifically your journey to 13th and Joan.
Sure. Thank you. And thank you, friend, whomever that might be, for sending that information over. That's really cool. So, my name is Audrey Ori. And the first thing I want to say is I think it's amazing how God will create full circle moments in your life. I published my first book at the age of 10. I was in a class and they were offering kind of an enrichment program for students that were really completing their work ahead of time and kind of just needed something extra to do instead of creating chaos in the classroom. So
Right.
this lady, her name is Dr. Harris. She pulled me out of class and she said, I want you to choose a project and you can choose whatever you want. You can write, you can draw, you can, take pictures, whatever it is, I want you to create something. So I was like, okay, cool. I'll write. That's very easy for me. I'll do that. So I decided to write, and the project was completely self-guided. I had to decide what I was going to write about, what the manifestation of that writing would be, and so on and so forth. So I decided to write a book about Black women in my community who were um, examples of excellence, really, because I felt like they weren't being highlighted, similar to what you're doing with this program. And so after doing that, I then assembled a book signing and I invited the press and the media out and I sold copies of my book. And it was really amazing, but I didn't think that much of it. I just thought, I had done this project and kind of seen it through, and I was proud of that. I went on and I was a normal, student, and home was filled with domestic violence. I was also in a single parent home, and so single parent home, and then my mom discovered love, and that domestic violence was rampant. So there was some connection there to um, telling the story versus keeping house business, as we would call it, kind of house business. And,
Right.
there was something to going out and pretending that everything was okay, but knowing that there were, things that weren't okay inside. And so that caused a lot of frustration. What do you do with that energy? What do you do with those thoughts? And so writing was something that came natural. And from time to time, I would kind of write about it. But again, I kept it all kind of bottled up. So as I progressed, I went to college for education, got 3 degrees in education, and I was, to be a teacher, to be an assistant principal. I went on to do that, become an assistant principal, and I loved my career. And I really thought that's where I would end up. My family relocated, got an offer to relocate. We were in the state of Florida. And so I'd gotten my certification there. And then I was pregnant with my youngest daughter. So at the time, I had to make a decision. Am I going to keep pursuing a career that I would kind of have to turn around and now start from the bottom and work my way up in a new state? Am I going to launch a business? What am I going to do? So I made the decision with my family to become an entrepreneur. What I didn't know at the time is that hard work alone was not going to be the only way to be successful as an entrepreneur. It takes more than
You
just hard
talking
work.
now? Yeah.
I thought, you know what, I'm going to start this business and I'm going to make my same income that I have been working over 10 years now, to make in 1 year because I'm a hard worker. I'm going to jump out there and I'm going to have success. And so I failed miserably at that. The other thing is that when you leave a career, something that you have worked so hard to attain, you have to kind of figure out who you are. So I was kind of lost, what am I doing? Who am I? What is my identity? And then I decided to launch this business, but the money wasn't coming in. It was a nonprofit organization. Doesn't mean nonprofits don't make money, but I was not. I was making enough to kind of keep things going, but not to profit, not to pay myself. So long story short, wrapped all of that around. And I started the nonprofit servicing 500 women and girls, and teaching them about leadership, teaching them about entrepreneurship as I started to pursue this myself now, and taking, classes at the Urban League. So in that, it led me to develop a product. And I learned that you have to sell something. You have to sell a service or a product in order to generate money. It can't just be off of, good measure. So from there, we started the nonprofit, and I decided to write a book as a result of needing to advertise, but not having traditional advertising dollars. I did not have money to advertise in, a lot of the bigger kinds of outlets. So I decided to write a book. Well, the first time I decided to write a book, I was told that it would be $10,000, and that was for me to write it myself and to get it published. But again, I had quit this job. I did not have $10,000 as disposable income for a project like that. So I started to do a ton of research. What could I do? What are my options to get this book done? Maybe at a lower cost than that. And that immersed me into the publishing world. While I was producing that book, I sought out 21 women and teen girls to write their stories on behalf of them. I wanted to write about them in the book, but I wrote it as if I were them. And so after I wrote it, I contacted them to read to them, what I had written, and everybody started crying. And I was really shocked at the way that what I had written, as if I were them, impacted them. It was just shocking to me. So I went on and I thought, okay, this is great. That's awesome. So I wrote the book, published the book. Everything went well. God saw fit for me to find the proceeds. It was not the $10,000. I had found a couple of loopholes in different routes. And so it was almost half of that, which was really great for me. In doing that, though, I got a call. There was a client from a show that would be airing on VH1 who was in need of some type of product. Again, I need a product to brand. Can you write a book for this person in about 30 days? And I'm like,
wow.
I could probably do that. Because again, it's that thing that you do that you don't even think about doing that is purpose, right? That God has given to you that you just do it. So I'm like, yeah, sure, absolutely. What I didn't realize at the time is that was ghostwriting. And so eventually I continued to understand that this was a career and that this was a job and this was something that people needed. The problem, and as I had gone through lots of entrepreneurial classes now, I recognize that if there's a problem and you have a solution, then you also have a business. And so the problem that people were having is that after they had their book written, they needed a place to publish it. And so that was the birth of 13th and Joan. I had created 13th and Joan to just publish my own work. I knew that writing one book wouldn't be it for me. I was going to write several, and I was just going to publish my own work. But it became a home to publish books for other people. So that's a long story, but that is how 13th and Joan evolved. It evolved out of a need to help people and to help myself.
Got it. That's great. Thank you for that. So a couple different things I hear there that stand out. One, I'm thinking about going through school, and sometimes as an African American male, I feel like the stuff that I was reading didn't interest me. And for the longest time, because a lot of the curriculum, I think, is more Eurocentric, it didn't appeal and I didn't connect to it. So I think I was deceived for a while about the idea that I didn't actually like reading. And that then affected me as far as actually writing things down too. I'll say about myself, I'm more well-spoken than written. I just find it much easier to articulate my points verbally than to write them down. But I say that to say, what part, because you have the education field as well, what part do you believe that school will play in what you're doing now as far as storytelling? Because I think sometimes what's presented to a child in their developmental years concerning certain subjects may shape how they view it. and they may not be as interested later because they might feel like this isn't for me.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's a really great and insightful question. I do 100% agree that sometimes representation is not as prevalent or even, present as we need it to be. And I think that it absolutely shapes what we become, what we believe about ourselves when it comes to various subject areas, as well as our abilities. So I think that the solution to that is not an easy one because, it depends on the environment that the student is in as to what they're going to be exposed to, how much of that content or how many books are in the library of students that actually look like children of color. But I think the number one thing that we have to do is to create those opportunities. We have to be on a rampage, to make sure that there is more children's literature that looks like us. We have to make sure that there is more access to science and math and, ways and words and vocabulary and things that look like us. And so a lot of that happens outside of the school. One of the things that
Yeah.
I tell my children who attend schools in which they are vastly the minority is that we create a lot of opportunities at home. Your parents will always be your best teachers. And so what you're learning in the world is really how to navigate through society versus, the history and committing that as your own. You're learning how to navigate in the world. And that's what I think you should be getting from school versus this is who I am.
Right. So I've seen culture play a part in what is considered good writing. So for you, what's the barometer for, how do you gauge good writing versus something that needs work, and pretty much the line between something that's publishable versus something that isn't? How do you
Mhm.
gauge what's good and what's not? What are the factors that play into that?
Sure. So one of the things I tell people all the time is that um, everyone is not a writer, but we all have great stories. The
Right.
example of that is what you said. You said you feel that you articulate. So if we were to have a conversation and I say, tell me about a time when, we would have an amazing, exchange. And so what we do is we try to take those narratives and make them um, have good grammar. At the end of the day, good, solid grammar is the barometer for us. Otherwise, a story told is a story told, and we firmly believe that. And so there are some words that we use, in one community that might not be used in another community, or the way in which it is used. I think I was just seeing a meme on Instagram and it said, I'm good. And it had I'm good like 7 different times with 7 different meanings. And so,
Right.
we want to make I'm good. That means, like everything is okay. You good? That's you straight. Like there's a lot of different things that allow us to kind of go back and forth. And so for me, we want to make sure that our books have solid grammar. Subject verb agreement is not something that is debatable. A placement of a comma that can be, up for discussion in different ways. But the Chicago way is basically is what we utilize. And so that is utilized through all book publishing. And it's just very important that we're able to adhere to good, solid grammar. But otherwise, we believe a good story is a good story.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned the meme. I every day I get stressed out due to social media and the use or lack thereof of the Oxford comma, and the
Mm-hmm.
whole your and the wrong to, and like you hear about somebody passed and folks talking about sorry for your lost, and I'm like,
Yeah.
guys, we this is too much. I can't. You're about to make me log off. Like
Yeah.
it's sorry for your loss,
Uh-huh.
LOSS. Like and I don't want to like stick my nose up, like
Sure.
education, because sometimes people don't have access to know these things. But after a while, it's like this your two, and so on and so forth. It
Mm-hmm.
needs to be understood because I think oftentimes, if you, as you mentioned, grammar, if you're not able to articulate things in a grammatical and clear way, you may have a good message, but your message can be completely missed because you weren't delivering it well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And we fully believe in that. Happy New Year versus New Year's is another one.
Oh
So
yes,
yes,
yeah,
but we are sticklers for grammar, and we actually spend a lot of time going back and forth with our authors, when something is not grammatically sound. And it doesn't matter if the story is about we're writing right now for a narc, and a lot of the language that's utilized in his environment is not necessarily something that you would utilize in a different environment, but good grammar is good grammar. And so we can't get away from that.
definitely. So, what are some of the services that 13th and Joan offers?
Yes. So 13th and Joan is actually a full service publishing house. We wanted to create something that people would not have to go to, five different places. We could take them from ideation all the way through publishing and distribution. So, say, for example, an author comes to us and they're not sure what they want to write about, or more commonly, they have a lot of ideas and they're not sure how to tackle it. We will work with them to construct, simplify what it is that the book is to be about, what kind of content will go into that book, and how that book is going to open doors for their future success. That, I think, is one of the things that really sets us apart from other people. It's not just about publishing a book. We want to make sure that the book is published and that it is industry standard. It should not look like a self-published book. And that's not shade to self-published books. That is just saying that we're operating as a publishing house. So we want to make sure that our books and products are respective of that. But
Absolutely.
making sure that the book is on point, but also, who are you as an author? What is it about your brand that's going to make someone have an interest in this book? Because books are published and turned around, every single day. So we want our authors to think beyond the book and look at their brand. But we do everything from covers to interiors. As I mentioned, the ideation, we do distribution, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Books A Million, all those players. We do book tours, US book tours we set up. We do a lot of work with branding. And so we run, the gamut of services just to make sure that our authors are on point.
Absolutely. So, getting more toward the celebrity ghostwriting aspect of it, because I know some people hear that and think, well, that sounds cool. We don't really know. That's not something you hear about often, just because I think, by nature of it, you're not meant to broadcast too much. I wrote for this person, so on and so forth. Kind of like with rapping as well. If someone's
Mhm.
ghostwriting, you don't really say, hey, I wrote for Kanye or whoever the case may be.
Mhm.
But uh, if you could speak to the inner workings of it, not necessarily identities, of course, but how it works, because I know sometimes there's a debate about authenticity if someone else wrote it versus someone bringing ideas and then someone coming along to help them put that in writing. Because once again, you have some people who have a story but may not have the skill set to write it at the standard that's necessary. So could you speak more to authenticity in bringing a story and still maintaining that? Because I would say I'm of the view that you can still you can still be authentic if you present a story to a team and then they lay it out for you. But the crux of it are your original ideas. They're just
Mhm.
helping you to deliver it. They're the conduit. That's the way I view it. But some
Mhm.
people tend to view it differently. So could you speak to that?
Sure. So, I have certainly operated in several different capacities. I've operated in a capacity where an author has brought me what they have written, and they're at a point where they feel they just can't go any farther. I just, I can't produce anymore. I've got writer's block. I can't take this any further. One or two things can happen at that junction. We either coach them through it, and some people will say, you know what, I don't even want to be coached. I just need you to take this and finish it for me. So we have that. That is, original ideas. And that's kind of just mimicking the content that is there to reproduce more. That happens a lot in business books. Recently, we were booked for a sci-fi gig, which is definitely different in doing that, but still mimicking that same thing. So that's kind of when people have their own ideas. Most of the time, people know what it is that they want to say or they want to talk about. It's a matter of organization, bringing those ideas to the forefront. So we
Hmm.
have scenarios where it's completely partnership, if you will. And then we have some scenarios where we may talk to the author, a very small amount of times. And they are more concerned with having a product, because people do understand that having a book is a product that you can sell. And so that sometimes is the goal. Is there authenticity in a scenario where they're only concerned with the product? I would say there's authenticity in the idea. That's about it.
Hmm.
There's authenticity in what is being written. It's original content that's being produced. But sometimes, as I mentioned, some people are not concerned with that. But those who are concerned with it, they are really a part of the process. And so it's not just, someone writing and they are not involved at all. An example that I can share with you, many of the clients we don't disclose, but this particular client outed me. So they did it first. It wasn't me. I didn't say a word. It was Donnie Simpson from BET. And he was
Okay.
certainly, growing up for me, someone that I watched every day, thought he was amazing for Video Soul. And he outed me as his ghostwriter. And he said, she is helping me to write my book, but he's so involved in the process. We talk all the time. We had 90 days of 5 a.m. calls. And we were just talking, as friends, kind of going through the information. And my job was to organize everything in a creative fashion and also to embody him. So the thing that I say is very fun about ghostwriting is that there is never a boring moment. I could be writing for, a businesswoman who is trying to decide if she wants to walk away from a career and a family to, becoming Donnie Simpson. And I do work very hard to embody my clients, to become them. So it's a lot of hard work. And I want to say that having a background in counseling, my mother was a counselor for over
Hmm.
40 years. That is one of the things that I think helps, because you have to do far more listening than you do speaking. So very fun career.
Very good. I think it's a good story to share and show the legitimacy of it. That sometimes people have platform and they have an idea, but they need help along the way. So,
Hmm.
boy, it's funny that he outed you. So then it's like, hey, we can
Yeah.
talk about this now. It's out
Yeah.
there. But yeah, that makes sense though. So for some that may be interested in kind of stepping out, and I think that you can speak to this if someone's looking to establish something similar to what you do or any other area of entrepreneurship. I know a lot of people get stuck on not knowing where to start. And a lot of times the thought process is, I don't have a lot of money, so I can't start something. I can't quit my job. So for people that are on the cusp of they have this thing that they want to do as an entrepreneur or independently, but they're at that crossroads of, well, I don't have enough money to just launch, and I don't feel comfortable quitting my job yet. You were able to make a very unique transition. So could you kind of coach them through or coach them across the finish line in that regard?
Sure. So I first of all want to say that I do not subscribe to the quit your job to become an entrepreneur.
Hmm.
I don't subscribe to that. I think that you can use your job to fund your dream.
Right.
If you love it, you will get off of your job and you will go home and you will do it. If you love it, you will do it during those hours when everyone else is asleep. If you love it, it will call your name when you are trying to run in the other direction because you don't want to be bothered. And that is the thing that you should be doing, because as you do that, then I think that it leads you to fertile ground where finances can be produced. What I like to tell everyone, and I love to be fully transparent, is that I struggled as an entrepreneur for 9 years until I made that income that I was talking about. It took me 9 years. I was not the 3 to 5 year business curve that some people talk about. It was
Hmm.
9 solid years. And within that time, for 8 of those years, I did not pay myself. That is not to say that I did not make money. I did, but I reinvested every single dollar back into my business because I
Yeah.
needed to do that in order for it to grow. Now, that being said, I am in a two-person home. And so I have a husband and we work together, and we decide how everything is going to go. So I also don't want to give the false, hope or advertisement that this is just okay, great. Well, I just won't pay myself. No, you have to live. You have to do that. And I also don't advise other people to do that. If you're familiar with The Richest Man in Babylon, that is not the way to go, towards wealth in terms of not paying yourself. But it was a sacrifice that I was willing to make because I was doing something that I loved. The other part is that I stumbled in those 9 years. I had not launched 13th and Joan in those 9 years. I started with the nonprofit. I realized
Mm-hmm.
that the nonprofit, after 4 years of working, that it was not bearing the fruit that I know that was needed to be successful and to carry out the visions that God was giving me. And those visions were far bigger than anything that I thought I could ever achieve. So I knew that I couldn't do it alone, but you have to know when to pivot. So I had to say, okay, great. This is making enough money to feed itself, but there is nothing left over for me. I know this is not what you want from me, God. What is next? I went into a cosmetics business with selling lip gloss and lipstick because I had that audience of 500 women and girls. Well, who better to sell lipstick to than these ladies? And so
Yeah.
I did that. That was making money, but again, not enough for it to take care of the person who was making the most sacrifice for it. So I started to recognize that there are patterns between sacrifice and self-care. Okay, if this is not making enough money to at least help me to buy groceries, to help me to do small things, this might not, I need to pivot again. So I pivoted several times. And it led me right back to that talent that I had been executing. But that was the thing that I would have done for free. So I think that we have to be very realistic in saying, okay, if I want to take a professional development class, how much is that going to cost? Let me set that aside, but not necessarily always jumping out with no parachute with finances, especially if you have other people that are depending on you. What I will say, though, is that you must be in pursuit of it at all times. So if you want to do something, you have to do it. You cannot wait. There is no perfect time. There'll never be the right amount of money. There'll never be the right amount of resources. You'll never have just the right connections. You have to do it so that people will see that you're serious about it. And then lastly, I want to say you have to also be so specific about what you're doing that people learn to come to you for that. That makes a tremendous difference as an entrepreneur. If you are do everything, do hair, you change tires, you clean houses, there is not that it's harder to carve out your niche. And so you have to carve out your niche and let people know exactly what you do. And that way people will start to see you as the go-to for that thing.
So I literally am trying to contain myself because it really feels like the climax of the sermon at church because you said so much, and I might have them, have the editor put some organ behind you because that was like, because it's so real that I think because of what we see on social media, I think we bought into this idea of an overnight success and instant gratification. So I think it's so real that you bring it back down to reality and didn't say, "Oh, I did this and then it just worked out perfectly and I prayed and God just showered down." Like, no, 9 years is very sobering, and it's a process. And if you're called to it, I think, like as you mentioned, you're willing to go through that, but there's work along the way, and it's something interesting to be said about process. Because if you went from the first step that you mentioned directly to 13th and Joan and there was no in between, I'm willing to bet that you would have missed out on several lessons in between.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So,
Totally.
yeah. So I think it's great that you spoke to that because I think it's a challenge to be willing to do the work outside of the work. And by that, I mean, we have an idea of what we want to do. This is the thing that I like doing. This is what I'm passionate about. So I'm okay with that work. But the work to get to that being your full-time thing is some other work that you may not have signed up for, but it's a part of the process. So I think you bringing it back down to reality is very helpful. And I'm glad you took it in that direction. So we're definitely going to add the Hammond B3 organ over your voice. But
Hello.
so moving on. If there is someone out there who has an idea, they have a book, or they know that they want to write, they want to continue writing, but they maybe haven't been able to produce those books at industry level or at a level of excellence that will be consistent with doing it from a professional perspective and confidently saying that you are an author, where would you encourage someone to start who is interested, believes they have the gift and the calling to it, but don't really understand the connections and the professional side of presenting your product in the best way? Where do you think that they should start?
Right. So the first thing is that not making any excuse for the execution of the writing. I think that a lot of times, people say, well, I'm not done yet. And so that's an excuse. I'm not finished with the writing. But why aren't you finished with the writing? Because if you have time to scroll on social media, you can just give up one of your scrolling sessions and commit some words, some sentences, a paragraph, to paper. You can speak into your voice recording and jot down a story if you have time to scroll. So there's always time. I think that's one, is that we have to alleviate that from our cache, that we don't have time, because there is time. The second thing is that, we say, okay, well, we don't have the money to invest. We don't have the money to create it. What we created at 13th and Joan, I know for a fact, it is one of the cheapest that is in the industry in terms of publishing packages. And that's not something that I'm saying like, oh, we're the cheapest, because I don't always agree that the cheapest is the most quality. I am a firm believer in investing in yourself where necessary. I was just able to create something for us that I knew was industry standard quality at a very low cost, because it's just exactly what authors need. So when I would say contact 13th and Joan, and I'm not just even saying that as a sales pitch. I
It was
really
a
mean
setup.
that. We do complimentary consultations. We do that
Yeah,
on purpose. This is to help people to ease into it. I was so fearful when I contacted that company and asked them. I just, that's always like, what is the price? You already feel inferior because you don't know, you're in a new uncharted territory. You don't know what the price is going to be. You don't know if you can afford it. You already feel like you can't afford it before you even call. So I would say contact us, because we do complimentary consultations. We take you through the process, what is needed. A lot of times we have so many people who say, okay, great, I'm going to save that and I'm going to come right back to you. So, it's very, very reasonable, and it's done on purpose, because we want to make sure that no story gets turned away when it comes to representation. And that is critical. So contact 13th and Joan, go on our website, look at the resources. Honestly, my social media, I am encouraging people to write all the time. I have, funny ways to say it. And so I would just say immerse yourself in an environment or around content, follow people who are doing those kinds of things, and you will learn all that you need to learn. And don't be afraid to use Dr. Google. He does work.
that's it. That's it. So that you just came full circle. That was perfect. I normally at the end set it up and say, how can they connect with you? But I think you've already put it out there. What are those social media handles and the website?
Awesome. So the company is 13th and Joan, 13THANDJOAN, and that's all social media and all of our websites. And then mine is I am Ardrey Ori. That's ARDREORIE. That's all social media and all websites.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Well, I appreciate you joining us. You dropped a lot of jewels and preached as well, and I think that's what we needed. Hopefully, it's inspiring to those who are trying to step out there and do something new, but they do so with wisdom and planning, and of course, with the counsel of others. So you've given quite a bit of jewels, and I appreciate that. Thank you. This is Maliek Blade, and that was Guest Who.